Akbar had evolved and perfected various ways to govern his empire. One of the mechanisms was the Mansabdari system. It evolved and matured during Akbar's time. The two numbers, Zat and Savar, assigned to a Mansabdar, defined his position in the court and the number of cavalry he commanded. This system worked for some time, and thereafter, like most other systems, a crisis developed within itself. The Jagirdari system was evolved to pay the salary of the Mansabdars. In fact, both were complex apparatus to mop up the surplus of the agrarian sector. As Irfan Habib would say, all these were mechanisms to secure the bulk of the peasant's surplus. In our last program, we had seen the evolution of the Jagirdari system. We saw its development and working, the different types of Jagirs that existed in the Mughal Empire. We also dealt with some of the difficulties the Jagirdars faced. They ranged from the rates of collection fixed by the centre to the mid-season transfer of the Jagirdars. We had an occasion to look at some of the rights of the Jagirdars. We also had seen some of the functionaries in this system. In this program, we shall deal with some more officials in the Jagirdari system. We shall also look at the crisis that developed in the system, leading to its demise.
We were looking at the Jagirdari system and particularly the administration of the Jagirs. We have said that there were three-tier administration, and we have seen last time the staff of the Jagirdar, and we were discussing the staff of the local officials, so to speak, the Kanungo, and we shall see today the Chaudhury, and then we shall see the staff of the empire, the imperial officials. Now Kanungo was either a Kayasth or a Khatri of northern India. They were very good in doing this kind of revenue stuff. And in Bengal in the early 18th century, we find that most of the Kanungos were Kayasths. In case of Chaudhury, which is the second of the local officials, we see that he was a Jamidar, perhaps a leading Zamindar. Now, how the Chaudhury evolved and how he came into this position is a long history with which we are not concerned at the moment. It has been more or less ascertained that Chaudhury originated from the 14th century onwards. Now, Chaudhury's function here as a local officials, unaffected by the transfer of the Jagirdar, is to collect the imperial revenue. Chaudhury is also a hereditary office. It is for his life, and after the death, his succession would require an imperial sanad, that is an imperial order. He may also be removed only by the imperial order. Now Chaudhury has another function. Chaudhury is the person who collects revenue from the smaller Jamidars and also becomes a Zamindar, that is a Zamin, a surety for the smaller Jamindars. So Chaudhury has two more or less very important functions, although he has certain other functions as well. For example, he is the person who distributes the agricultural loan called Takavi loan to the peasants along with the Muqaddam, that is the headman of the area. Chaudhury also is the person who helps to formulate the Jamadami, the demand for the revenue, and he signs the Jamadami order along with the Muqaddam. Needless to say, without his seal and signature, the Jamadami is not valid.
The role of the Chaudhury was very significant in the Mughal administration. His holdings consisted of his core property, including palatial houses like these, and the land assigned to him by the emperor. He was given some remuneration for his services. It is important to note that this remuneration was always a proportion of the land revenue that he collected. In fact, the Mughal government cleverly used the knowledge of the zamindars about land and its productivity to maximize the land revenue collection.
Now, Chaudhury gets certain remunerations for his services. In the beginning, it was 2.14% in Gujarat. Later on, this was reduced, and finally it was reduced to 5.8%. But during the later years of Aurangzeb, his remuneration increased. He was given certain cash allowance called Nankar, Nankar, and also certain Inam lands. Chaudhury, since he is a Jamidar, his core Jamidari, that is own personal Jamidari, is assessed either at a lower rate, or, which we'll see later, or he is not paying any revenue for his own land. So Chaudhury has certain privileges and certain functions. As a Zameen of the smaller Jamidars, he gets 5% of the revenue paid by them. Chaudhury continued till the British days. Although from the 18th century onwards, the functions, powers and duties of the Jamidar changed to a considerable extent, which we would see in our next lecture in the Jamidari system.
According to Abul Fazl, the zamindars in the Mughal Empire could muster about 4.5 million retainers, mostly infantrymen. In addition to these, there were the imperial staff appointed by the emperor. All in all, as a historian would say, it was a vicious circle of coercion helping to maintain a machinery of coercion.
The head of the imperial official in the province is the Diwani Suba, the Diwan who is in charge of the finance and the revenue. He has a staff, fairly large number of staff in each province, and he has certain powers also. He could report against the Jagirdar to the emperor, but he cannot remove the Jagirdar. If the emperor gives the command that the Jagirdar should be removed, Diwani Suba may then take the help of others to remove the Jagirdar. But on his own, he can only report. The Diwani Suba has certain other officials as well. One was fairly important. He is the Faujdar. Faujdar technically is the military representative of the Mughal emperor in the province, and he is not supposed to be under the Diwani Suba but under the Subadar. But because of the collection of the revenue involved military powers, the Faujdar has to obey the order of the Diwani Suba to do certain things. So technically he is not under the Diwani Suba, but he has to follow his orders as well, so far as revenue collection is concerned. Now some of the bigger Jagirdars, they had their problems with the Faujdars. And during the later years of Aurangzeb, he tried to solve this problem by giving Faujdari powers to the bigger Jagirdars, which of course did not solve the problem at all. Then apart from the Faujdar, The other person was Wakia Navis, who is actually the news reporter. Once again, he has no power to remove anybody, but he could give adverse report against somebody on which some action may be taken. It is stated that the Wakia Navises are very corrupt, but there were instances of honest Wakia Navises as well. So these are the staff of the imperial officials, apart from the other staff as well. For example, in the 27th year of Akbar, he ordered a new official be appointed called Amin, A-M-I-N. The Amin created by Akbar has the same power as the Diwani Suba, and it is not necessary to repeat these powers. But in the 1634, in the reign of Shah Jahan, the post of Amin was abolished because it was thought that it was a mere duplication of the work that Diwani Suba was doing. So there were certain changes within the staff pattern of the imperial officials in the Jagir itself. But basically, these remain more or less the same, excepting in the fact that in the 18th century, the Faujdars were becoming too much powerful. In the early days of Akbar, actually even up to 31st year of Akbar, the Jama of that is the revenue estimate of the Khalsa, was 1/4 of the total Jama. As we have said earlier, that the Mughals divided the land into two types so far as revenue is concerned. One was the Jagirdari areas, and the other is the Khalisa areas managed by the state. So in the 31st year of Akbar, we see that Khalisa occupied no less than 1/4 of the total Jama. After the death of Akbar, during the time of Jahangir, this changed abruptly. The reasons are not very clear even today, but it appears that after accession, Jahangir increased the number of the Mansabdars, increased their salaries, and gave more Jagirs. So at one point of time, as I have said earlier during the Mansabdari system, that it became a strain on the Mughal Empire. And as a result of this, during the time of Shah Jahan, as we have seen earlier, certain measures were taken to reduce their salaries, etc. But Shah Jahan here, so far as Jagirdari system is concerned, tried to follow the policy of Akbar. He tried to follow the policy of Akbar in the sense that he tried to increase the Khalsa land. And by the end of his reign, Khalsa land had reached 1/5 of the Jama of the Mughal Empire, almost to the point where Akbar had left it. During the first 20 years of Aurangzeb, the Khalsa land increased more and more. But during the last years of Aurangzeb, the second half, there was a crisis which could be seen very clearly in the fact that after a certain time, no Jagir was available for the Mansabdar. One of the contemporary writers, Anand Ram Mukhlis, stated that it is very difficult to get a Jagir but it is almost impossible to take possession of it without a very large force. So Aurangzeb had to increase the number of Mansabdars because of his wars in Rajputana and in Deccan. Instead of the Rajputs, as we have seen earlier, he had taken the Deccani and the Marathas. And the number of Mansabdars increased to a great extent during the last 20 years of his reign. This led to a severe problem, a serious crisis in the Jagirdari system. After the death of Aurangzeb, this problem increased more and more. During the first years of the Emperor Bahadur Shah, he had given mansabs to almost anybody he met in the Darbar. The number of mansabs increased tremendously, but there was no Jagir. So there was a fierce competition, a fierce faction fighting within the court, on which Professor Satish Chandra has written an excellent book, Parties and Politics of the Mughal Court, 1707 to 1742. Here he had shown that the faction fighting is not based on religious grounds, which was earlier thought. This was based on personal loyalties and personal interests. We'll come to the viewpoint of Satish Chandra a bit later. Now, the problem was tried to be resolved by the Mughal court, and the secretary of the Deir Aurangzeb, Inayatullah, tried to make some reforms. But by that time, the vested interests in the court had solidly entrenched themselves, and the emperors did not have any power at all. By the time we come to the middle of the 1720s or 1710 even, during the time of Farrukh Shah, who was a very incompetent emperor, with his incompetent Wazir Abdullah Khan, the court order was a mere paper. Nobody listened to it. Furthermore, the Dewan Ratan Chand gave ijara, which is the contract, mostly to the Hindu merchants and the Kashmiris. Why Kashmiris, it's not very clear, but the Hindu merchants and the Mutsuddis of the court, that is the clerks of the court, maneuvered to get mansabs and ijaras in the Jagirs. This led to serious problems, and in 1721, Nizamul Mulk, who founded the dynasty in the Deccan in Hyderabad, he was appointed the Wazir, and he tried to cancel the ijara. He tried to increase the Khalisa lands, that is, he tried to solve the problem. But by that time, once again, as I have said, it is too late. The vested interests are solidly there. So what we see, that nothing was done, things continued to deteriorate as years roll on. Some of the Jagirdars, particularly the big ones like Sadat Ali Khan of Awadh or Murshid Quli Khan of Bengal, they created their principalities out of the Jagir and became almost, I would say almost or semi-autonomous kings themselves.
That is why earlier emperors transferred the Jagirdars at short intervals. It had its own problems, but it did not give the Jagirdars an opportunity to settle down. Once the Jagirdars became stable, they established themselves as kings. This was the beginning of the end of the Jagirdari system.
Till 1740s, almost the end of the 1740s, these people or their descendants used to get the formal order of succession from the Mughal emperor, which was obviously given for money. But after that, the whole thing changed. So the Mughal system of the Jagirdari developed into something else by the 1720s. And the Jagirdars became the provincial satraps of their own, later becoming kings by themselves. We now come to the last portion, the discussion on the crisis of the Jagirdari system.
Regarding the reasons for the crisis, different people have different opinions. Eminent historians such as Irfan Habib, Atar Ali, Satish Chandra and Siddiqui have given different reasons. Some agree, some, as usual, do not. Let us listen to some of their opinions.
I would say the modern historians, because the earlier historians of 19th century, they did not pay much attention to the Jagirdari system or their crisis. We start from the writings of Irfan Habib, the agrarian system of the Mughal Empire, in which Professor Habib had shown that the Jagirdari crisis is linked to the crisis of the Mughal Empire. But it is basically a crisis in the agrarian system. Because the agrarian system was in crisis, therefore the Jagirdars began to oppress, leading to peasant revolts who were supported by their Jamidars, particularly the smaller Jamidars. And the Mughals were in the difficulties. The second opinion could be seen in the writing of Professor Satish Chandra, who gave a slightly different version. He said that due to various reasons, in his Partisan Politics, the book, due to various reasons, the aspirations of the upper class could not be met by the existing revenue resources. Therefore, there was a greater oppression, not only by the Jagirdars but also by the Jamidars and others. And as a result, there were revolts and there were intense faction fighting within the court, resulting in the paralysis of the court. There was no decision in the court at all, excepting one or two cases. The third one was given by Professor Atar Ali, Mughal nobility under Aurangzeb, in which he followed more or less the opinion of Professor Satish Chandra and called it a Jagirdari crisis. To him, the crisis of the Mughal Empire was basically a Jagirdari crisis. And he had given not only the system of crisis in agriculture, in which he dwelt much less, but also on various administrative measures, various administrative problems, like the emperors leaving North India, the Emperor Aurangzeb leaving North India during the last 20 years and staying in the Deccan, creating a deadlock in the North Indian Mughal administration. So to Atar Ali it was a Jagirdari crisis, but it is a different one, slightly different one from that of Irfan Habib. The fourth one was given by N.A. Siddiqui, who had worked on 1707 to 1752 on the Mughal land revenue system, and he also found that the Jagirdari crisis is the crisis of the Jagirdars, not necessarily the crisis in the agrarian system itself. The crisis in the system was there, but the basic one was the crisis of the Jagirdars, because due to various wars and difficulties, etc., the Jagirdars could not collect the revenue of their salary, they could not maintain their sawars, and therefore they had to oppress the peasants, and therefore the problem starts. And after a certain time, he says that no Jagirdar was transferred. He remained as long as he wanted. As a matter of fact, Siddiqui had produced a copy of the order of a Dewan during this period. This order was copied in another book written in Gujarat, but it shows that the Dewan more or less accepts that the Jagirdars could only be transferred when they wanted. So therefore, the problem was of manifold. The problem was not only a crisis in the agrarian system. The problem was not only in the higher aspiration of the Mughal ruling class. The problem was not only of the Jagirdars not being able to collect the revenue which they wanted, or the institution of the Ijara. All of these are certainly there. But there were also the faction fighting, the fighting among the Faujdar and the Qazi and so on and so forth. So it was a breakdown of a polity, not only of one particular system, but the breakdown of a Mughal polity in all its different worlds known to us. And it is this failure to reform, failure to survive, failure to re-establish, that the English East India Company took advantage of.